Hello, my name is Shane O'Connor. I'm a history student at FSU. I'm in my technically second year, but I'm still consider myself to be a freshman. And today I am going to be talking about Marxism and the French Revolution. So when you hear the term Marxism, a lot of people think of the economic system, but even though this has connections to it, it's not really related. It just the historical interpretation called Marxism argues that all of history is a story of class struggle between the powers that be and everybody else, pretty much. So like even though it does go in line with Marxist thinking, there's it's really compatible with whatever your beliefs about the economy are or beliefs about society are. So now that I got that out of the way, I'm going to give you a brief introduction to the revolution, and then in part two of the video, I am going to argue why Marxism is the correct interpretation. So, the revolution started in 1789, but it had to start for a reason, and the reason was that France was in serious economic woes. In 1776, they backed the American Revolution, built on a lot of debt for that. They just had a series of incompetent finance ministers combined with the fact that Louis XVI held all the power. It was an absolute monarchy. Um, and it just riled up the French population, especially those in the lower classes, because they were the ones who bore the blunt of bread bread shortages. They a lot of times it was a struggle to get bread on the table for dinner. So then Paris was getting very antsy, to say the least. And then in 1789, that's when Louis XVI, who was the king of France at the time, who was really resented, so was his wife Marie Antoinette. That'll come to culmination later. Um, they agreed to call the Estates General to the demands of the Third Estate. So they met for the first time in 150 years, and the Estates General was like a legislative body of sorts, but it had to be called, and it was not like regularly meeting. And it was composed of three estates: the clergy, the nobility, and everyone else. So 95% of the population got one third in the vote because they each had one. So that caused an issue when they did end up meeting, because to pass any serious tax reform, you have to have a majority, and of course, the clergy and the nobility aren't going to agree to tax themselves. The third estate left, and they went to a nearby tennis court. They took a very famous oath, the tennis court oath, which said that they would meet there until a new French constitution was formed, and they did that in the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen. It called for religious toleration, religious freedom, the end of seigneurial rights, which is like the privileges that nobles hold. Um, it called for church lands to be confiscated, for members of the clergy to be government officials, like they are government employees. So that stamps out corruption. And Louis XVI, with all the violence that was going on in Paris, you may have heard of Bastille Day, where they seized a fortress. With all the violence going on in Paris, the king agreed to reform, and then and so the National Assembly, which was the third estate, became the legislative body of France, and they got some really revolutionary things done. Their entire government was founded on Enlightenment principles. The king still had some power, but he was like the National Assembly bore most of the power in the country. Um, but as the revolution went on, it got more radical. They tried they changed the calendar to like a metric 10-month calendar. Just a bunch of like weird stuff like that. They were like killing nobles left and right. There was actually there was a counter revolution in the Vendée region of France, which is the northwest and like the coastal region, and they were very Catholic, very monarchical. So they started an uprising, which was stamped out with struggle, but they ended up killing tens of thousands of people in the name of the revolution. So this is where the issue with the revolution lie. Like it's not like people do not like it's not that people don't like the gains made by the revolution. It's that a lot of them argue that it was unnecessarily bloody. So here is the Marxist interpretation of the revolution, is that all of the all of all of the violence that happened during the revolution was a culmination of the interior and exterior forces that were pressuring France back into a monarchy. So essentially, the reign of terror was necessary. And it's really hard to accept that fact, but the gains that the revolution made are way more important than the casualties. Like for instance, with the revolution, now French citizens got representation in government, and that was never done before in France or most of Europe for that matter. So they could vote for tax reform to end like bread riots. I mean bread shortages. Like it's very important that the lower sects of society have a say in government because the rich aren't going to look out for them. Um, so that's the Marxist argument, is that all the gains made from the revolution were worthwhile. The other argument, which is called revisionism, essentially says that it was a useless bloodbath that didn't really do anything. Their argument is that post-revolution, that's when Napoleon took power and he held absolute power. And then after Napoleon fell, there was a Bourbon restoration where the Bourbon family, not Louis XVI, he was guillotined, but his niece or nephew, his nephew came to power and restored the monarchy. But I think that this revisionist view is rather short-sighted, because all those gains made by the revolution, religious toleration, representation in government for everybody, just democratic ideals in general, they stuck in France. Like they are still there today. They were even under Louis Philippe in the Restoration. They like the gains made by it were just too much to sacrifice. Like they had to protect those ideals, and even though they might have gone a little overboard with the Reign of Terror, it ended up proving very essential. And in an economic sense, it's even more important because with the end of seigneurial rights, there's now some level of upward mobility. Like, I mean, it's still very hard to become a rich person as it is today, but they can, like, peasants can at least move up in society, and they did, and income inequality went down. It was the so with the reforms, you saw much of the economic power going from the old aristocracy and like the monarchy to the growing middle class, like not peasants, but like merchants and people that lived like in Paris and were moderately well off. Their economic power increased greatly. And if you look at the rest of the 19th century, the bourgeoisie or the middle class drove the industrial revolution. Without that shift in economic and political power, France wouldn't have had as successful of an industrial revolution as they did. They might not be an industrial country. Italy was under an absolute monarch for the longest time, and the south of Italy is still a very poverty-stricken place. So this argument, I mean, the gains made by the revolutions are still applicable today. They still have some sway. They like the revisionist view, even though yes, it did end in an emperor and then a monarchy. It created some level of accountability in government, as well as shifting the economic power more to the center. So I I think that I think the revisionist view, although it does present valid points, on the on the reign of terror, it's just too it's too narrow. You can't you like when you're interpreting history, you have to look at how it affects other things. History is a domino effect. It's not just a straight line of events. Everything affects each other, and that's what I love about history. Is what I can dive into it and see how one law passed affected this, and that's how we get to today. And it's just super interesting. And I hope that I made some valid points today. Um, if anybody who's watching this wants to refute it or maybe add on to it, feel free to do so. I'll put my email on here somewhere. So hope you have a great day.